always to know if you're joking or not, Sean, but appreciate that. But indeed, you know, just triathletes aren't known for their sprint, but we're going to find out today. Last week, we had some athletes show us what they could do with the sprint finish at the end of the race. Let's go ahead and look back at what those athletes did for us last week in our first racing series. Together some of the greatest triathletes in the world to start this 4-race series here today. We've got 30 truly world-class athletes ready to take on Watopia's Figure 8 in a points race format, with points being scored at both KOMs and at the finish line. Here we go!
This field is pretty nuts. We have athletes that are spread across all different disciplines and distances.
We've got the 3 medalists from Rio in the race, Alistair Brownlee, Johnny Brownlee, and Henry Schumann. We've got Lionel Sanders, Joe Skipper, 2 powerhouses on the bike, and a plethora of Ironman champions here. Here we go across the line at the first KOM.
Lionel Sanders first, Reese Barclay with a great performance coming across in second.
Lionel looking really strong and aggressive in today's race already.
We got James Cunningham, super strong long distance athlete that has done incredibly well.
Casper Storn's really driving that second pack, trying to bring 5 or 6 of these athletes with him. Johnny Brownlee here, just positioning himself well towards the front. We got someone going off the front already.
It's got to be Vanderdrijs. If I was a guessing man, I'd say it's him. He always won to put it down when nobody's expecting it. So he's trying to get a gap going into that climb. Let's see what happens as we come across the line. It looks like it's going to be Sanders.
Joe Skipper, he's got a little gap off the front here. We're under 5K to go.
Under the Flamme Rouge, 1K to go.
Curry with the big move, using his aero power, 600 meters out. We'll see Joe Skipper chase. Kenny Vanderdrijs chasing well too. Cunningham on the lead. Wow, yeah, Cunningham, Costas, Mike Phillips crossed in the first 3 positions. Cunningham quiet all race. We knew he was strong over a sprint finish, and wow, timed out perfectly.
At the moment, any escapes from our 3 kids under 3 is good racing. It's just an escape. It's brilliant. Winning is just a bonus. I've been using Zwift for ages, for years even. But it was always a training tool for me. My first Zwift race, I didn't know what a power up was. I had no idea what they were doing, or what buttons to press to make it happen. But yeah, I got into it pretty quickly and really enjoyed it.
Well, that's awesome stuff from James Cunningham. Clearly he shows that you can learn pretty quickly how to excel in Zwift racing, but you have to have some strong legs behind you, and James certainly has that. Let's take a look at this week's course and race format, Sean. What do we have in store for our riders this week?
Yeah, today we're at Crit City. It's an event-only course with 16 laps today on the Bell Lap circuit. We do have an intermediate sprint point at the end of lap 8, so there'll be points available there. So keep an eye out for the finish on lap 8. And back to 30 points for the finisher in today's race. So the first place gets 30 points, all the way down in the places to 1 point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the tactics are going to be important in today's race. Obviously, crit tactics are always important, but with all these points up for grabs, people are going to have to decide when they want to kind of spend all their energy. And a good way to be able to not spend as much energy during a race like this is to use the proper power-ups. Let's take a look at what power-ups we've got, Sean, and just give us the top 2 for this race and how you would use them.
Yeah, when I'm racing on Crit City, or every time I'm on Crit City, I prefer both double draft power up and the Aero helmet power up. The Aero helmet power up will be the one that kind of decides the winner at the sprint. But the other ones you can use tactically along the way. Save your aero helmet for the final lap and make sure you time it perfectly into the sprint.
Yeah, and I think obviously having a power up that's going to help you try to win the race is important. But when the pace is high, especially after that intermediate sprint this go around, I think having one that's going to make it easier for you to stay in the group is probably important as well.
The double draft lasts for 30 seconds, so it gives you a significantly more time to rest, save those legs, and get prepared for what's coming up next. We do get 16 power-ups with 16 laps on this course, so be a ton of power-ups and a ton of athletes using them throughout.
Absolutely, and those athletes are getting their last minute prep ready, sprinting a little bit to open the legs up, but also spinning out. Let's go down to the pens and see the last 30 seconds before we get this race underway.
Yeah, being warmed up before the start of a Zwift race is super important, and especially here we see athletes sitting in the pen, checking out their competitors, but the final 5 seconds is of the utmost importance. You want to really build up your power, kind of build it up through 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, and be at high power once the gate opens. And we'll see it here in the next 5 seconds. These athletes will be building their power and really getting ready to watch that gate go.
Yeah, Sean, the advice is always, build up, start out strong, but you always have to start out about twice as strong as you think you need to start out. And they're out of the gate hot for sure. And we have the athletes definitely pushing some high watts already, up over 5-6 watts per kilo as we begin our first lap in Crit City.
Yeah, the beginning of these races is super important. You don't want to let any gaps open. You don't want to be hanging on the back by yourself, losing space, which looks like we're already seeing a little bit of a gap there at the back. So you want to close that up, stay tight, and then keep your nose out of the wind.
Yeah, absolutely. It does look like we have an athlete already getting caught out a little bit at the back of the pack. We got Reese Barclay. No problem for him. He's got a lot of experience, so he knows he needs to get back on, but he's going through his rolly section of the course, Sean.
Yeah, and I've coined this section the whoops. So keep an eye out for this every time we go around. It's the one section of the course that has some little ups and downs, little hills, little gradients, and then it comes up to this little slight kind of false flat here on the end. It's 3% down to 1%. So this is a great place for athletes to use power-ups, try to get away, make a sneaky attack, and get some separation between their competitors.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. And most of these athletes have taken time out of their busy training schedule to familiarize themselves with this course. And what's cool about this course as well is that every time, every minute that goes by where you're learning the sections of the course a little bit better and maybe setting yourself up to know, the intricacies for that last lap or even that intermediate sprint down the road. What parts of this course as we go through this lap to you seem to be the most important to kind of set yourself up for that sprint finish?
Yeah, so we come through the finish line and we immediately go into that whoop section, that little up and down roller section. It's not too hard. You usually won't see a lot of separation there, but there is, if somebody really pushes it, can get a little gap. And then it pretty much flattens out. We have a small descent in the middle of the lap. You don't want to have a gap off the back of the pack on that descent because it's super hard to catch up when a pack is moving through that fast. And then again, we'll come into this final section where we start to see these last few turns leading into the sprint. You really can't see the finish until about 100 meters to go. And this little left-hand bend here is kind of the last finishing straight. We've got about 400 meters here. In this section is where the last attack will probably happen, but you don't want to wait for this final right-hand bend because it's already about too late. You see 100 meters to go and then final bend, and you want to be already up.
Yeah, that's a perfect description, Sean. I appreciate that. I appreciate you showing me how it's done yesterday. It's a great course with the pros. It's a bit of a wrecking Sean shows all about that's pretty easily, but right now, athletes on the screen running some power-ups as they go through the finish zone. Alistair Brownlee on the screen right now, 350 watts, 5 watts per kilo, just 7 3 minutes into this so far as they go through the section of the finish.
Yeah, you can see the athletes burning the power-ups there that they really are not planning on using. So whether they're using the Ghost or the Burrito through the wheat section, they know they're not going to use it here. They're just trying to get rid of it. So you want to burn the power-ups you're not going to use because every lap, if you're sitting on, say, a Burrito or a Ghost power-up, and you come through that finish line and get rewarded with a new power-up, you're not going to get a new one. So you only get one power-up at a time. So you see Alistair here burning a Burrito power-up.
Yeah.
But he's looking just to get a new and a better power up next time around.
Yeah, there you go. And Reese Barclay making sure he's out of danger up at the front, taking his pull at the front of this course. Sean, talking about those power-ups and making sure you burn them, are there any that, we're getting so many, as you said, you're getting 16 power-ups on this course or during this race. Are there any that you would save for a few laps, like you wouldn't risk not getting it towards the end? Which ones are those?
Yeah, the Aero helmet is by far the most valuable in this race today. Without any big climbs or like real sustained efforts on a climb, you want to save the Aero helmet power up for the sprint finish. It's going to be the deciding factor in today's race. So if you're 3 laps out, 4 laps out, and you finally do get an Aero helmet, it might be worth saving if you're comfortable enough to hold on to it to the finish.
There you go. Good call. And right now, it looks like we have pretty much a full group together. We got Jackson Laundry, Canadian, in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. You can see him in his pain cave. It looks pretty comfortable. Looks like a fun place to torture yourself with 30 of your closest friends in triathlon. Jackson Laundry's had great results in our series so far to date and always been very consistent and a big Zwift racer. So good stuff from him. The pack seems to be mostly together, Sean, but I've got a few surprises. It looks like we have maybe Blumenfeld is just dangling off the back of this group, trying to get back into the main field.
Yeah, it looks like from what I saw, 14 seconds down, that's not dangling. He's well separated and will likely be out of the race here. It looked like Tim Reed might have been back there as well. So 2 athletes, really strong Ironman athlete and a ITU athlete in Blumenfeld that have fallen off quickly here. And that really shows the importance of getting out hard, getting well positioned, and then just trying to keep connection, stay solidly in the pack and not do too much work.
Yeah, and I think it's important, these triathletes know everything there is to know about experience in triathlon racing. That's not a question. But often when we try something new, we think the challenge is going to be what we expect the challenge to be, but sometimes it's a little bit different than that. So making sure, these athletes have experience in Zwift racing and have taken a couple turns around the course and know kind of the pitfalls to avoid is going to be important. It certainly isn't the strength in the legs that has gotten Blumenfeld and Reed drop this early. It's probably more of an experience thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's never usually the actual power of the athlete. It's really strategic on how you use your power in the event. We know Zwift racing is very hard from the beginning, and if you're not ready for that and not ready for a 3-4 minute really high power effort, maybe you didn't warm up enough, it's too hot in your pain cave, whatever the issue is, if you're not prepared and you're not expecting it, these things can happen all the time. We've seen the best athletes in the world get dropped from a Zwift pack because they just weren't ready for what was about to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to be ready for what's coming, and you have to have the legs to back you up as well. Again, still Jackson Laundry was on screen there for a second. We got Reese Barclay. He's just off the back. He's going to want to kind of get in the middle of that group to save as much energy as he possibly can. Reese had a great performance last week, scored a bunch of points with his top performance. So he's in a great spot in 4th place right now in the GC is Reese Barclay.
Yeah, and another note for anybody watching at home and who's not Zwift raced before, you can have technical issues with either your Wi-Fi setups, the computer you're running your game on. If there's any sort of technical issues, you can get dropped really easily, and there is nothing you can do about it. It's kind of like the real world or the real version of a mechanical out on the road. I know we're not cycling outside, but indoors with all this technology and Wi-Fi and drops, you get a Wi-Fi drop at the wrong time, there's no catching up. So something to be aware of here. It may be something as simple as Tim Reed's Wi-Fi dropped out 10 seconds into the event, and there's just nothing you could do about it. So,
well, word on course, or word from the course, Sean, is actually that Tim Reed kind of made a mistake when he was getting prepared this morning and designated a TT bike for his bike today, and you can tell us what that means when a race like Crit City starts, Sean.
Yeah, that's a tough mistake. A TT bike in a race like this means he can't draft, so he doesn't get the draft effect like we see Lionel here sitting on the back getting the draft effect from the group. Tim would be on his own the entire time, just pushing his own power. So on a race that's so punchy like this without draft, it's nearly impossible to stay with the group.
And here we go, Sean. We've got Joe Skipper. If you were paying attention, if you were in the pens, like we were watching some of these comments, Joe Skipper, he is one of the biggest smack talkers in the game, and he was definitely maybe he was trolling his competitors a little bit, saying he wasn't going to attack till halfway through this race. But Joe Skipper has gone away. He's 2 seconds on the main group. And Sean, could you guess who is trying to bridge across right now?
It's old Kenny Vanderdrijs. I mean, it's as predictable as the sun coming up in the morning with Kenny making these attacks. I don't know, like if you give him a carrot out there, he's going to go. So it's a nice little group right here. 3 going off the front, Vanderdrijs, Skipper, and Brady Curry, another someone we would expect to be making these moves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Braden Curry, if we talk about, who was the most aggressive rider last week, we were just going to go ahead and make an award and call it the Vanderdrijs Award. But last week, Braden Curry took that, and he was very, very aggressive. And we've got the 3 of them. It looks like they've been brought back now, but Braden Curry definitely tried to get a little bit of a gap there on his competitors. And Sean, I think one thing that we all overlooked, or you forget, when you have these athletes that are so multi-dimensional, you forget where their strengths lie. Braden Curry, he was a fantastic Xterra racer. He was a really good off-road racer, adventure racer as well. But we look at him now as a very talented Ironman runner, with actually his running being his strength because he's such a phenomenal runner. But Braden Curry, with his mountain biking experience, has the ability to be able to push really, really high watts, sit up for a second, and then push him again. So Braden Curry, I think, might be underestimated in this series in general.
Yeah, and especially with a mountain bike background, like the Crit City course will suit him pretty well. Going through this little whoop section, you saw him just get out of the saddle for a second, push down some high power, make sure he stays towards the front. And then he's going to be about recovering, sitting in the pack, and really waiting for those sprint points. The intermediate sprint point at the end of lap 8, and then again, that final 150, 200 meters of the race to get maximum points across the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we go. It looks like everybody's pretty comfortable. We got a few athletes burning some power-ups, a few athletes using their double draft. That's a good way to save some energy. We see a few of the athletes moving to the back to take a little bit of rest. That was Joe Skipper moving towards the back of the field to make sure he had the ability to get a little bit more recovery in his legs before his next attack.
And the athletes who usually will win on Crit City are not the ones who average the highest watts per kilogram. It's going to be the athletes that are the smartest, sit in the pack the longest, never take a lead or never yo-yo off the back, and really manage their efforts best. We see Aaron doing a good job here. 136 beats a minute. He's just sitting in the pack nicely, kind of on the front at this point. But you see some of the turns, most of the time he's just sitting nicely in the pack, keeping his nose out of the wind and conserving energy, and doing a good job of it so far.
Yeah, he's doing a great job. The alarm clock went off pretty early in the morning for Aaron Royal. We can see it's dark outside where he's at, but he's definitely focused on this series and sacrificed a little bit with that early alarm to join us, and we appreciate that very much. Aaron, we've got Johnny Brownlee still up in the front taking a pole. Sean, we have so many talented athletes and riders that we're talking about that we forget some of. It's my fault, but we're overlooking some of these athletes. We saw Gustav Eden just took a pole in the front. He's pretty good, isn't he?
Yeah, 70.3 world champ, good. He did it on a very hilly course that was tactical. He actually won that race on a road bike. So majority of the triathletes last year in Nice were all on TT bikes. A few select athletes chose to go with a road bike because there was, I think it was a 16K kilometer hill in the middle of the race. So he chose the road bike and ended up paying off for him as he climbed really well and then had a nice descent and kept him up near the front.
Well, insider tip, Sean, I talked to him after the race and he said, I chose a road bike because I don't have a bike sponsor and don't have a TT bike. So that's one of the reasons he was on that bike. We see Ronnie Schildek on screen right now. We do have an athlete off the front, none other than Alistair Brownlee, a couple Olympic gold medals, and he's trying to get a win on the Crit City course here as well. He's got 2 seconds as he goes through this section of the course, Sean.
Yeah, and we saw he made that hard push through the whoop section, and now he's on that little bit of a false flat. We'll see if another athlete tries to jump up. Eden's on there and leading the chase pack, but doesn't look to be really going after it. He's only 4 watts per kilogram. Odin's still the same. It looks like
Yeah, he's got 3 seconds, and again, I think that is exactly it, Sean. It's not necessarily does Alistair think he's going to go solo the rest of this way. He's playing a carrot. He's going to let himself dangle out there for a little bit and hope maybe even a compatriot like a Joe Skipper will come across. He knows that if Vanderdrijs is near the front of the group, he's going to do his best to jump across. But sometimes these athletes won't get enough of a gap. They'll only get a second and a half. And in my opinion, that's just not enough. You need that 3 to 5 seconds so that if an athlete tries to come across, they don't just bring the whole group with you.
Yeah, and this is the point where it is semi-dangerous. He's got 2.5 seconds. If one or two athletes make the jump across and get back to him, then there's a legitimate chance for them to stay away a lot longer. If it's just him alone, I think he's going to get rolled up here pretty soon. And it looks like it's already starting to happen with Braden Curry, Tim Don up there pushing high power, just really trying to reel him in before he gets too much of an advantage.
Yeah, and that's a good call, and that's exactly what they did. And it's one of those attacks that he has a plan, right? He's like, okay, I'll do half a lap. And if I get 3 seconds for half a lap, I'm going to, maintain a steady output, but I'll quote unquote, let the group get me. He's not going to play all his cards here at lap 6 of a 16 lap circuit. So right now he's back you can see him back in the middle of the group, but right now Casper Storns at the front of this group. And again, he's a pretty good athlete as well. Sean, what would you expect out of him on a course like this today?
Yeah, he's a ITU athlete who's won a WTS race in Bermuda, so super strong on the bike. He did it with a breakaway. This course should suit him pretty well. I know he's newer to Zwift racing, so maybe a little bit of a learning curve from the last race or two, but he's solidly in the pack and pushing really hard up at the front. 300 and 400 watts, 6.3 watts per kilogram.
Yep, here you go. And here's that whoop section. It's a section that is pretty fun to race. If you don't have experience racing on this course, you should get out when the course is available and jump on it. It's pretty fun. A good way to have a little RPM variability and work a couple different zones. Usually it's full on when I'm out here trying to ride, but it's a pretty cool section of the course, and it sets athletes up for the ability to maybe make a breakaway. So I think that's what we'll see that a lot. Right now on screen is Matt Troutman pushing 4 watts per kilo. That's pretty steady. That means they're kind of settled in a little bit as it goes up to 5 watts per kilo. But as I just said, your watts are going to be all over the place on this course, and that's just determined by the course, but also, of course, with these athletes that we have on screen. Now, Sean, we've got one more lap till we have our intermediate sprint that has 7 points for the first one across the line. And last week we realized and we saw, and a bit of a surprise to James Kunema after winning the race, how important those intermediate sprints were, with the fact that James won, but he is still a fair amount of points behind Lionel Sanders, actually 10 points behind Lionel Sanders in the GC. So what do you think tactic-wise we're going to see coming into this sprint lap?
Yeah, I predict it's going to be very similar to last week. I think Lionel will be gunning for the intermediate sprint point. I think we'll see him move up slowly in this next lap and try to take that intermediate sprint point so he can get those maximum 7 points and then help just solidify his position at the front.
There you go. I think that's a pretty good call. And I do think it's an opportunity if those athletes really are taking that intermediate sprint that seriously, which they should, because 7 points are a lot. And, talking to James Kunema yesterday a little bit, he's got 10 points to make up, and he knows that's a big feat, even with 3 races remaining. Is, Sean, in my opinion, there's a very good opportunity and a big chance for this race to split up at this sprint if somebody like a Vanderdrijs or a Curry decides to not go for the points but attack straight over the top.
Yeah, and that's where you have to be very careful if you're kind of at the back of this pack, trying to play the I'm going to sit in, not go for the sprint, but save as much energy as possible, because if that pack does split apart and you get caught in the back trying to be too conservative, you may never catch back up again and get to the front for the final sprint finish. So it's going to be very interesting tactics here, and we're just about a half a lap away from this intermediate sprint. Somebody's off the front.
Yeah, it looks like we have who is it? It's none other than Braden Curry. He's trying to take over the reins from Vanderdrijs on the most combative rider, as we see Sam Appleton comfortably in the group. Good job on Sam Appleton staying in the group this time. He had a rough week last week, getting dropped fairly early, but he's made some adjustments, and obviously he's a great racer. But Sam is not even a closet gamer. He loves gaming, so he's one there. But right now, Braden Curry, 4.5 seconds, Sean, into the sprint lap. So is this a game or a play to win this intermediate sprint, or is he going for the gold here with 5 seconds now, Sean?
I mean, I think he's going for the intermediate sprint, and I think he's going to get it. Almost 6 seconds now. The others are probably sitting up, looking at each other like who's going to chase. And I think we'll see some of them just wait for that, try to sprint for that second position, because at this point, Curry 5 seconds off with probably another 1,000 meters to go. I think he might be able to hold this group off for this intermediate sprint point.
Yeah, here I thought he was going to attack after the sprint, but he's going for those sprint points. And with him last week, he was very combative, as we said, but he only finished in 13th place in the GC. So if he gets 7 points, he's going to move up into the top 10, depending who else is around him. So phenomenal move by Braden Curry, but looks like he is brought back.
Yeah, it's very interesting. He looks like he sat up there and I'm not sure if he knew the laps and knew this was a sprint lap, but he looked like he tried to make an attack. No one went with him, and then he sat up. So interesting. And we're into the final sprint coming up here.
Yeah, and here we go, coming into that last corner, going up, and it does look like it's Sanders with Royal behind him and Phillips. We will get official. It looks like Kunema got himself in the top 5 there. That's going to be very, very important for GC implications if that was the case. So here we go, sprint points. Yes, Sanders, Phillips in second, Kunema in third, Royal in fourth, and Jackson Landry getting on the board with a 5th place. And now is the important part, Sean. It's strung out. Is somebody going to attack over the top of this?
Yeah, this is where you got to be very careful. Watch for these gaps to open, because if you were conservative at the back, you're feeling that yo-yo effect. You could get strung out and really popped across this whoop section. So gotta stay on it, stay up, stay in the draft, and not let a gap open up, which it looks like there might be one starting to open.
There are some gaps. It looks like we have Curry is a couple seconds off. Eden, is 5 seconds off the front of this group. McNamee is getting blown off the back of this group, as is Tim Van Berkel, Matt Hansen, Bazzone. It is blowing up. Gustav Iden is off the back as well. So, Sean, things are happening here with at lap 9, Alistair Brownlee. I think he had this in his game plan. He was going to keep the pace high after that sprint point.
Yeah, and it's fairly predictable. The sprint goes out so hard, and a lot of the riders behind him may not have been really pushing that extra gear to try to win the top 5 sprint, but they've waited and now have pushed across over the top and are really trying to separate the pack at this point.
Yeah, and with this high speed, it's going to be really hard for them to, these little groups. I mean, you look at Lionel Sanders, looks like he's caught out in the middle. So we have this little chase group of 4 with Henry Schoeman, 3rd place at the last Olympics in Rio, a bronze medal. He is trying to get across. Looks like maybe that's Alistair Brownlee that he is with, and then Lionel Sanders in front of him. So definitely a split with athletes panicking. It's panic stations trying to get back on there, but there are athletes that are not going to get back on, and that's Matt Hansen, Terenzo Bazzone, Brown, Appleton, Van Berkel, McNamee, Iden. Those are all off the back, and they have a group, so it's possible they can work together to bring back, but not likely, I'd say, Sean.
Yeah, you could see the front pack sit up a little here now that they may not have gotten the gap they were looking for. It's still a relatively large pack. Maybe Alistair or someone who pushed across wanted to have a smaller group off the front, and we've got a pretty large group, looks like 10 plus riders still in the front group with a smaller group behind, and they're going to need to work super hard to make up any distance or it's over for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And other athletes that are off the back of that as we go coming up on the whoop section are Ben Canute and Henry Schoeman are indeed dropped. It does not look like they've gotten back on at this point. Canute is 7 seconds back with Henry Schoeman, and they are going to have a hard time getting that 7 seconds back, Sean.
Yeah, and it looks like John back of that dangling. Let's see if he gets back into this pack. I see one of the Scott jerseys, which I believe is Alistair. I don't see Johnny in that pack yet, but he was only 1 second back, so he might be able to pull back up into this group.
Yeah, and right now, Sean, it looks like Vanderdrijs and Skipper are trying to soften this group up. They're definitely pushing through that kind of false flat climb section at the end of the rollers. Both of those athletes taking a dig. They see that there's a chase group, and it's very important, Sean. Like thinking about tactics, there were 7 points to win that intermediate sprint. But if they can get this group down to 10, they're going to guarantee themselves 20 points at the finish line. So being active and making sure they're proactive at the front of this course to split this group is going to ensure that they get points, even if they're not necessarily great sprinters. And I'm surprised Lionel Sanders off the back again, Sean.
Yeah, he's been yo-yoing back there. I don't know if he went too deep in that sprint and he's starting to feel it, or if this is just a little bit of tactics where he's trying to reserve, trying to stay quiet, keep his nose out of the wind and into the draft, but he just ends up bumping himself to the back every time. We saw he just moved all the way to the front and is now kind of cycling back to the back again. So it may be a little bit of that finesse of going too hard, letting too much off the gas, and finding himself at the back of the pack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great call, Sean. And it takes a lot of work to do that. So that's going to add up the fatigue in his legs here as we're 10 laps of 16 laps into this course. He's still got a fair bit to go. And that's what's cool about the tactics of a points race with that many points up for grabs halfway through is that you really have to make a conscious decision. Like, do I have the ability to do a full out sprint and then recover and finish with the group? Because it could be worth it if Lionel still finishes in the top 3. I mean, he got 40 points last week to Costa's 37 and James Cunnama's 30. But if he finishes 12th because he's so jacked from trying to do all that effort in the middle of the race, he's going to lose a lot of points.
Yeah, and especially since those laps after the sprint were so hot. I mean, he looked like he was getting a lot of separation. He's got to use even more power to try to get back make sure he's into that draft. And that, I mean, lap after lap, that takes its toll. And you can see it can really wear down your legs, spike your heart rate, and put you in a disadvantage when it comes to that final 300 meters of the finishing kick. And again, somebody off the front end, it looks like Joe Skipper.
Yeah, it's Joe Skipper again, Sean. He loves this section. You do too. It's the whoop section. I think he used a double draft to ride himself through the field as he goes to this section where it does pay to have a lot of power, and it does look like he has almost 3 seconds at this point. Costas, Troutman, Odin are trying to bridge it back, but it's starting to open up even a little bit more. 3.5 seconds, Sean. If he gets this gap again, I think it's maybe too much for him to hold on his own, but he's trolling. He's that carrot, and look at how hard he's breathing, how hard he is working. And Joe Skipper really giving it all right now. 5.6 watts per kilo, 160 beats a minute, and he's still 6 seconds now, Sean. 6 seconds.
Yeah, 6 seconds is a little hard for someone to make a jump across. I would have liked to see Vanderdrijs or Cunnama or somebody, Troutman, make a jump when it was at 3 or 4 seconds, because I think that's makeable. 7 seconds on your own with the power Joe is pushing out is going to be very hard to pull back. So we'll see if the gap or the pack lets him ride off the front for a little bit, tries to maintain that 6 second gap, and then works to bring him back in the last 5 laps of this race.
And it's down now to 3 seconds as we see Skipper going past a lapped rider there. Reese Barkley putting in the lion's share of the work to try to get Joe Skipper back in the main field here. So great work by him. Braden Curry now taking a hard pull at the front at 6 watts per kilo to bridge up to Joe Skipper. So again, not surprised by the amount of talk that Skipper was throwing around before the race that he's going on another attack, and he has the legs to back up that mouth.
Anytime somebody makes those attacks off the front, it strings the whole pack out. And when you're sitting at the back the entire race, that is when you have to be careful, because you can open up a second here, a second there, and then use even more power to try to get back on. So even though you're not doing the attacking or really closing down the effort, if you let those little gaps open and that yo-yo happens, you're spending so much energy just to pull it back.
There you go. Now on screen, it's Reese Barkley. Definitely working hard. Again, he's an athlete that has really dedicated himself to Zwift racing and making sure he has the knowledge and the experience to do well in this series. As he uses his power up, he's using that featherweight going to the front, and actually, while he's on screen, doing a little bit of a breakaway over the 6% section. So let's see if we can get Reese Barkley off the front of this group. He has 1 second. Can he stretch it out as who comes across, Sean?
Vanderdrijs.
Van der Dries every time, and that Van der Dries doesn't take a soft pedal to make sure Reese gets on his wheel. He goes straight across, and we have Van der Dries with a gap on Reese Barclay and a 1.5 seconds back to Jackson Laundrie. So, Sean, with 5 laps to go, we're at lap 12. A lot of action here, 2 seconds. Now, can these two athletes work together and hold a gap?
And they are working together. We just saw Reese pull back through. Van der Dries now taking it again back to the front, wanting to keep the pace high. I would have liked to seen him use that power up a little better. He used the double draft, but then went straight by Reese. It would have been nice to have him sit in, save a little, and then take a harder, longer pull once that double draft wore off.
Oh, everybody's a critic, Sean. I mean, come on now. Just kidding. That's your job. Van der Dries, again, I think I observed the same thing, but he cannot help himself. He wants to be free. He wants to get away from that group. And right now he's got Reese Barclay on his wheel. So this is kind of one of the better moves we've seen. It does look like it's getting shut down, but this is the type of move that it's going to take to get an athlete a breakaway to the finish without kind of this group sprint to finish up. But I do think, Sean, that these guys are going to be brought back.
Yeah, this course is so hard to maintain a breakaway off the front, especially with the big pack behind them. If they had 7 or 8, I'd like to see it. Maybe 3 to 4 really strong, aggressive riders could hold them off. But with only 2 and the talent and caliber of athletes in that massive pack behind them, it's just a matter of time. If they really want to shut it down, they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. I think that's smart as they go through the finish. Again, these two athletes are brought back, and it looks like it was Tim Don doing a lot of the work to bring those two athletes back into the fold. Lionel Sanders, again, kind of tail gunning at the back of this group, Sean. I've never wanted to doubt him, but he definitely has seen a lot more of the back of the group than we're used to. And going into this downhill section, Alistair Brownlee with an attack, already 1.5 seconds on the field.
And he's using his power up to try to maintain that gap, go through the whoop section. Looks like Skipper was trying to bridge across again with Sanders and Laundrie making a push. So we could have a little bit of a gap here and see if they can maintain a breakaway off the front of this pack.
It's Skipper using that double draft as he tries to jump across. Maybe not the best use of that, but Alistair Brownlee still has a bit of a gap, and it does look like it's stretching out. And these attacks won't always get you away, but they are just destroying the legs of the athletes on the back of that group. So if you're staying within yourself and you're not going all in, when the group packs up again, it might be a little bit smaller, and because of that, more points available up for grabs at the finish line. But Joe Skipper, it does not seem like he gets tired, goes straight to the front and around Alistair Brownlee and tries to make something stick here.
Yeah, and it looks like 2 to 3 seconds, 4 seconds is a nice little gap with these guys, Brownlee, Skipper, Van der Dries, kind of that's a nice group off the front. This could stick if
that's
the
big.
guys behind him,
Yeah, that's big. I think Kunema getting across is huge, and that's going to be alarm bells in that group. If you're Lionel Sanders, he's been at the back of the group, not great position, but if he sees Kunema with 3-4 seconds with a group like Alistair Brownlee and Van der Dries and Joe Skipper, he needs to get across. Now, Phil Graves also in this group, Sean. This is a very, very, very powerful group with big GC implications up the road.
And they've got to keep the pace honest up front. They got to keep pushing, and someone's got to take the pace and really drive that pack, because that 2 second gap, just under 2 second gap right now, it may not last 2 seconds. It could easily go up to 4 or 5 seconds if the rider at front really fatigues and falls off.
And this is big. I think Kunema needs to go all in here. He's the one that has the most at stake. If he wants to be able to get a lot of points on Lionel Sanders, it's going to be making a gap like this hold, but it doesn't look like it is right now. It looks like they're bringing it back. They're about 1 second back of this group, but wow, what a phenomenal little breakaway attempt by this group of 5 riders.
And watch through the whoops. They could see another counterattack here. Another couple riders might push through, might try to go over the top. They're just getting their new power up, so we could see a attack over the top here and try to catch some of those riders that tried to make the break a little fatigued.
Yeah, Braden Curry went straight to the front. I'm wondering if he's got the energy to try to go off the front as they go through this whoops section as well. But it looks like we have someone using a ghost to try to get an attack. We have James Kunema on screen trying to stay with as well.
Yeah, so it looks like they're sitting in, bringing back the pack all together, and it's going to come down to the final couple laps. I think that was the real threat of a breakaway, and it got pulled back. So I feel like the motivation at this point is going to be rest, sit, and go in. And I could be wrong, as I always am.
No, it's whenever we put ourselves out there, we risk being wrong, and Alistair Brownlee is going to revel in the fact that we can be wrong from time to time. So he's now got a second, but looks like James Cunnama coming up to his shoulder as well. So it does look like the group is back together, Sean. But the important thing to know is that we're looking at the gamification of this on Zwift, but there's athletes and there's bodies behind this, and all those attacks. It is tactical, but it only comes down to what your legs can do. And these athletes are going to be just absolutely worked here with another lap to go. So I think we're going to see some massive blow-ups. And I think once that sprint lights up, it's going to spread out pretty quickly. And we're going to know who had the most energy and who was the smartest and kind of how they spent it. I mean, you see those GC contenders. Lionel Sanders spent a lot of energy. James Cunnama just spent a ton of energy trying to get that group to go away. So I think there's a lot to be seen here with 2 laps to go.
Yeah, the intermediate sprint point in this race, I think, has made the back half very, very hard for these riders. I can imagine, and it'll be interesting to see in the post-race interview what they thought of that last 8 laps compared to the first, because I think the attacks and the sprint point in the intermediate has really damaged the legs, and pulling back all those little gaps is going to be very, very painful and hurt a lot. And we'll see who's saved the most amount of energy for this final lap.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Sean, that they've dropped 10 of some of the best triathletes in the world are off the back of this group already, or have been lapped once already. So it's definitely been full on, and there's no they haven't been waiting. As we see Lionel shake his head, he's definitely in a bit of a pain here, but we are 15 laps in right now as we see these athletes go through this whoop section. Your favorite spot, and I think it's going to be one more time, and we might have some big attacks going up this.
Yeah, now is not the time to be dangling off the back and using any extra power. You want to be solidly in the middle of that group. You get up and out of the saddle for just a little bit of these little bumps and whoops here. Settle back in, draft as much as possible. Hope you've had a aero helmet or you've saved one from the last few laps, because now is a critical time, and we see some athletes trying to push off the front again.
Yep. So who is it? Joe Skipper. Joe Skipper off the front of this group again. Vanderdrijs trying to bridge across. They just have a second and a half. Vanderdrijs is actually still a second behind Joe Skipper. So he has about 2 seconds on the main field, 1.5 seconds on Vanderdrijs as he goes in. And this will be an all-in, Sean. There's no giving it a shot and then trying to stay in with the group after this. This is Joe going for the goal.
Yeah, and you can see the pain on his face there. He's really digging deep here. 164 beats a minute, 523 watts. He's going deep. He's really trying to hold this advantage, and I don't see the pack back there. I think he's got a nice size gap here, but it is a long way out, and we'll see if he can hold it.
Yeah, I mean, it does look like a big gap. I'm having trouble finding the gap here on my screen, but it does look visually, it does look like he has a couple seconds. We can see the group in the distance just coming around the corner. Yeah, just coming around the corner now. So 5 seconds, Joe Skipper with a little over a lap to go, 2.5K, but it does look like someone is coming across to Joe Skipper right as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, that pack, if they're saving it up, you don't want to be the guy trying to chase Joe Skipper down at this point if you're a contender. So Philip Graves on the second wheel, he's really pushing the trap pack, trying to drive up to Joe Skipper and just to better his advantage and not let Joe ride away with this one.
Yeah, so 2 seconds now, but it does look like it's coming down pretty quickly, coming up to 2K to go. We have Braden Curry and Matt Troutman doing a bit of work at the front of this group to try to pull back Joe Skipper, who no doubt has been the most combative so far here today.
And that's going to hurt some people's legs. I mean, the ones at the back who are just dangling on, that really hurts when someone makes an attack and you've got to finally close that gap down and get back into the pack. And yep, we're into that final lap. It's going to be a barn burner here, and we'll see if there's any long attacks or someone makes a jump from far out.
Man, it doesn't look like much, but the fact that Joe Skipper was able to get on the back of that group, in my opinion, is a pretty big feat. As we go through the whoops here for the last time, Sean, on the last lap, let's see who makes the move. We have Jackson Laundrie at the front there. Matt Troutman also at the front. Philip Graves has been somewhat quiet. I'm looking at Ronnie Schildank. I think he's great on a course like this, and he's really hidden himself so far today as they go through the last little section, but nobody's going for the long move.
Yeah, and we saw no power-ups being used there, so we can kind of use that as a point of tactics. If they didn't use their power-up there and not making a big jump there, they're probably sitting in for the final and really waiting to use that power-up in the last 200 meters.
There we go. We got Reese Barkley at the front at 4.5 watts per kilo. Jackson Laundry just doing his quick turn and then going in the middle of the group with 1.2K to go as they go through this straight section. And Braden Curry takes a little bit of a dig at the front to see if he can maybe soften up the athletes, but no, he soft pedals himself as they get onto these cobbles. So everybody is together, Sean, with 1,000 meters to go. We have Reese Barkley at the front with Tim Don, James Cunema, Philip Graves, Lionel Sanders, Matt Troutman, Aaron Royal, Alistair Brownlee starting to put in the big effort. Braden Curry gets pushed to the back of the group. They have just at 700 meters to go. We have a couple corners to go. Somebody's using that Ghost power up. We see Philip Graves here in the middle of this group. Alistair Brownlee, 7.4 watts per kilo at the front as they go to this left-hand turn. They're going to see one more left at 400 meters, and that's about when we want to unload that sprint. So let's see. We got Braden Curry at the front, Matt Troutman, Costas, Curry in the back of the group. They're going through, and they will have a right turn, and whoever's at the front of this right turn has a very, very good shot to get the win. And it looks like we have – who is this athlete off the front? It looks like Braden Curry going long. Can he hold it around this corner? Braden Curry goes very early, and he is about to get caught at the line. Who was that at the line? Let's get the results here, but that was very last second, Sean. We had two athletes that looked like come over the top of Braden Curry that went pretty early.
Yeah, massive jump by Braden Curry. Probably a little too early. I saw when he deployed the power up and was thinking, that might be quick. But Mike Phillips with the win. Wow. 4.8 watts per kilogram. We didn't mention his name all race, and it shows he was saving it up, really waiting for that final kick, and won it with the lowest amount of average watts per kilogram in the top three.
Okay, now I feel a little bit better for not knowing who that was when he came across the finish line because we haven't really seen him yet. But Mike Phillips with a big win, getting 30 points. Anthony Costas in second. James Cunema gets a couple more points in third place with Lionel Sanders in fourth. Braden Curry getting on the board in fifth. So that's going to shake up the GC for sure. I think that's going to put Costas and Sanders pretty darn tight for 1 and 2, with Cunema probably still in third place there. So we will get that for you here just a second. But man, amazing sprint finish, man. I almost thought Curry was going to get it. He went so early, but he had huge power going around that corner.
It did. It looked promising, especially from the angle we were watching, where he had daylight, he had a gap. He was riding so hard around that turn, but really that last 100, when those riders came around from that pack and really drove to the finish line, they had a little bit more than he did.
Yeah, sure did. There we go. There's the finish line points. That's going to be 30 for Phillips, 29 for Costas, 28 for Cunema, Sanders 27, Curry with 26. So we'll get the tally here for you in a second before we get to the women's race. But let's get a quick replay of the action on the men's race in Crit City. Man, there was a lot of action so far today.
Yeah, and here we go. The riders' points on the day: 35 for Phillips, Lionel Sanders 34, James Cunema 31. That's going to keep Lionel off the front in the GC standings. We'll have to do the calculations and figure out exactly where those standings shake up after this race. Yeah,
but Lionel's definitely going to be have a pretty comfortable lead there, no doubt. But awesome results from Mike Phillips getting way up the board with some sprint points as well as taking the big win. So let's take a look at the replay and see how he did it. Man, last second, Sean. I mean, that was timed perfectly. I almost think he was listening to us and your advice specifically on when to let that sprint go.
Yeah, and you see a lot of those guys drop their power-ups too late. They waited till that last turn. We see them all fire up after the last turn. That means they're only really using about 4 seconds of that power-up. You could see a totally different finish if they deployed that, timed their sprint a little better, and used the full 15 seconds of that Aero Helmet power-up.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Sean. And for next time, I'm sure they'll use that. But that's it for Crit City for the June Invitational. So the athletes that took the biggest advantage of that course was it seemed like it was Mike Phillips here today. An amazing performance from him, and one that again we didn't really talk about at all. So stoked to see him get a great result there as we have our women on screen.
Yeah, and they're off. This is the tense part of the race, the very start. You gotta keep connected, stay together, not get dropped off the back, and wait for the race to settle in its first lap.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of time to maybe settle in. We say that here sitting comfortably with a cup of coffee on hand, but they're definitely all in at the moment to make sure they don't get dropped early, as we know can often happen just because the legs aren't quite warmed up, or just technically or logistically not being set up properly, as we saw a couple errors in the men's race early. But women going through that whoops section of the course.
Yeah, and I'd imagine this to stay pretty packed up for the first couple of laps. Hopefully we don't see anyone with any technical issues get left behind. But predicting similar race to that we just saw on the men's side. Pretty tight gap through most of the course. Maybe some separation lap 3, lap 4, if anyone wants to really drive and be aggressive. But then really looking out for that intermediate sprint point at lap 8 and see if that separates and makes any big gaps open.
Yeah, I think that's good observation as we see athletes going through the front, or Jocelyn McCauley, Kinsey Lane going through the front of this group with Brown at the front as well. So these athletes, it looks like so far everybody has stayed pretty safe. Looks like everybody's here with the group. So great work from the ladies, making sure they learn from any mistakes from the men's group. But they are off, and we have the entire group together.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the women will have their partners shut down all internet, Wi-Fi connection in any other device, because some of those little drops while you're racing is deadly and costs you the race. So you want to shut down any other device that's pulling some sort of Wi-Fi or internet connection before the race even starts.
Oh, absolutely. You got to make sure all that is under control, or the smart play would be not to be the person that causes your significant other to have a dropout. So smart play all around as we see our group together with Nikki Bartlett at the front pushing the pace as we have the entire group together on our first lap of Crit City.
Yeah, and it's staying relatively conservative here. I think we're going to watch to see if anyone gets aggressive. I know some of these women have raced some other Zwift events this week, so there could be a little bit of back and forth, a little bit of cat and mouse here. Who wants to really push the pace? Who wants to drive and be aggressive and make a break from this far out? Or if they're happy just to kind of sit in, settle in, let the race come to them, and try to wait for the intermediate sprint.
Yeah, and I think, if the athletes are warming up, they've probably been on the bike for 45 minutes. Almost all of those athletes that we see on screen now were riding while the men's race was happening. And if they were, well prepared, a smart athlete, they probably had that race on screen to see kind of how their race developed. Obviously, they're very different races when it comes down to it, just different athletes and different tactics involved. But to notice how that group just got annihilated halfway through, I think would be very important. And I think you might see the women be a little less aggressive going into that sprint point just for fear of getting popped out the back of the group.
And if you're not planning to make that sprint into the top 5, it could be worth saving your power up to just beyond the sprint point, so you make sure you have a little assurance to get you back into the pack, get up to where you need to be, and make it a little easier on yourself once that final sprint actually happens in the intermediate point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is smart. And right now, it does still look like everybody is together. And for those interested, we will get a final GC table of the men's results here after the women's race to see kind of how the GC is lining up, because we are getting into the meat of the series now with 2 races under the belt, at least on the men's side, with the women getting through the second race right now. Now, Sean, looking at last week, were there any big surprises to you in the women's field that you're going to kind of look at today to have good performance?
Teresa Adams is a big one. She's new to Zwift. We know she's a strong rider, and she's always going to be be at the top pointy end of any race she does on the bike. But being new to Zwift and coming out with her first win was a pretty big surprise. We'll see if she can back it up here today on Crit City.
Yep, there we go. We got Laura Sadal on screen right now, pushing 330 watts. No big deal. 165 beats a minute. She had a great race last week. I believe she finished 10th or 11th. I'll have to find my sheet here, but she was up in the mix all day long, and she's definitely prepared her week around making sure she backs that up here in Crit City as well.
Yeah, and we see her working really well right here. 165 beats a minute. The pace is up. The pace is hard. That's just how this Crit City course is. It's fairly fast racing the entire way with little spikes every time they go through those whoops. So it'll bump your heart rate a beat or two every time over the whoop, and then settle back into that very high heart rate for the entirety of this race.
There we go. And we have on screen right now Meredith Kessler, MBK, as she's known, at 380 watts, almost 170 beats per minute, Sean. And they're just 6 minutes into this race. We see a lot of athletes in this whoop section using their power-ups. A good place to use it. Meredith Kessler uses the feather power-up as she goes in that steeper section.
Yeah, great use of a power up there. We saw her get out of the saddle for just a second or two just to make sure she gets over the whoop with high power, settles back in, and is now just getting back to the pack and trying to conserve energy until they have to do it all over again next lap.
Yeah, and that's what's fun about the Crit City course. I think it can be a little bit monotonous, if you're not racing, but in the racing, it's just to have something different. So many different parts of the course, but it's also repeatable. So, I messed that section up. I didn't hold my momentum through the group that well. I'll try better next time. I think you can, learn every lap. And right now we have an athlete on screen that's been around for a bit, and she certainly learns year after year. Kelsey Withrow having a great performance. She was a road racer as well as obviously a professional triathlete with a couple big 70.3 wins in the last few years. Kelsey Withrow has definitely put a bunch of effort into Zwift racing, and I'm proud to say I've been able to ride with her out in Watopia more than a handful of times. But Kelsey Withrow, we're stoked to have her racing, as well as Jocelyn McCauley on screen, Sean.
Yeah, and Jocelyn was a little bit of a surprise last week too. She's not new to Zwift racing, but to jump up to second place last week, just across ahead of Melanie Moore and Lucy Charles, is a little bit of a surprise. We know she's a strong cyclist and has proven that over time and time again, both racing and on Zwift. But to see her come out second last week was nice. And she also took 7 points, 5 on the first KOM and 2 on the second KOM. So great racing from her last week. And we'll see again, Crit City, different course, different tactics. We'll see who's got the best legs this week.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, Sean. And Jocelyn, as you said, very talented. No surprise that she's at the top of her game in a competition that she's signed up for, trying to do well in the GC. But the women's race, the GC was a lot tighter at the end of the first race in the men's race. We had Lucy Charles Barkley in the lead with 37 points. Teresa Adams, who won the race last week, at 37 points, so a tie for first. And then Jocelyn McCauley just 1 point back in third place. So very, very tight. So in the women's race, these intermediate sprints are going to be very, very important, Sean.
Yeah, it's going to make some separation there. I know on Crit City last time we've raced, we've seen Melanie Moore do really well, Ruth Astle do well. So we know their sprinting capabilities, and 7 points at the intermediate point is going to be a nice bump up for them if they can get some 7, 5, 4 points there, and then again finish well on the sprint at the overall. It's going to just move them further and further up the GC standings at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And there, as we saw in the men's race, there's a little bit of risk to that. And maybe that's why we didn't see Lionel in the top 3 of the finish, is that he put so much effort into that intermediate sprint that it did seem like he was dangling a lot throughout the rest of that race. So yes, those points are very important, but these athletes, these women, need to check in with themselves before that sprint point and say, can I go as hard as I possibly can right now? And then do it again with 3 seconds rest.
And I think we've seen that from Lionel. Last week, he went for both KOM points, and then I don't think he was as concerned that he didn't win the race because of his GC standing. I think today, again, he's probably if he can get that intermediate point and finish in the top 5 or 6, he's probably happy because he's going to get a majority of the points on the GC standing anyway.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is a decision. I think he was very happy with the way he raced last week. Another athlete that's obviously been happy with her performances as of late is Ruth Assel. She is a phenomenal cyclist and clearly puts a ton of time into riding on Zwift, but specifically racing on Zwift as well. And she was an animator. If I had to pick the most combative for last week, it would be hard for me to look too far past Ruth.
Yeah, ZA Tri Academy member and does a ton of racing on Zwift and riding on Zwift in general. So she's very familiar with everything Zwift, how to use the power-ups, all the courses, and it's proven that when you are that experienced on Zwift, it gives you a little bit of an advantage.
And here we go on screen, Antonina Reznikov. She's had some great performances in our series as well. She is at the front of the group right now, pushing 5 watts per kilo, 176 beats per minute. Sean, all these athletes, we're all very different on kind of where our heart rate lands during hard efforts, but I'm pretty sure my head would explode if I was at 176 beats a minute. She looks good though.
Yeah, and Antonina's a former pro cyclist, so she's got the power in her legs. She's now a pro triathlete. Races a little bit more of the longer course. Ultraman, Israel Man has a win there, so look for her to be strong all day today and has that bike specific power.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like the field's getting a little bit spread out here as they go through those whips again. But Reznikov, as you said, she takes a lot of pride in her cycling because she has the Palmares and the pedigree in cycling-specific racing. But I don't think she'd be that stoked with where she is in the GC right now. She's 24 points, 13 points behind the co-leaders, Lucy Charles Barkley and Teresa Adams. So I'd expect to see something out of her today, trying to get some more points. Sean, it looks like we have a couple athletes off the back, maybe Klammer and Sodero getting separated a little bit right now.
Yeah, it's a very small gap, and it looks like one of them is going to jump back on. I couldn't tell which rider it was, but this is the downhill section. It's hard to get back to a pack when they're on the descent. And one of them made it, and one is clearly not going to make it and probably be out of the race.
That's Chelsea Sodaro is still 2 seconds back at this point. So she is hanging on. Again, she needs to get back to this group ASAP or it's not going to happen. And I think it's probably that time has maybe passed right now. Yes, 4 seconds back. But a group continues to get separated. It looks like we have 1s and 2s getting stretched off the back. Flora Duffy at the front of this group. She's not risking getting dropped off. Sean, if I had a surprise from last week, it was seeing Flora and maybe Paula Finlay and a couple other very, very talented athletes get separated from the field at that first QOM.
Yeah, we had a lot of great female riders get caught on that first hill. Sophie Caldwell was another one. Georgia Taylor Brown, Paula Finlay, and Flora were all in a pack together. And I don't know if it was just they got caught behind the wrong athlete. That little bit of a gap opened up, and they looked at each other hoping someone else would close it. And by the time somebody tried, it just was too much. And yeah, definitely surprising and not likely to happen here today. I think we'll have a nice pack all the way through this one.
Personally, I'm hoping we get a little split. I love the action of that intermediate sprint with a few laps to go to that. So I do like the idea of a large field sprint, but I like the drama of getting that group kind of split apart and seeing what happens here as we have Jackie Herring, very experienced Zwift rider at the front going through this whoop section. Nobody's being super aggressive. We haven't seen anybody really try to go on a breakaway yet. And I'm curious to see if we're not going to see that maybe till after that sprint point that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd watch for somebody to make a move in the next lap, in lap 7, maybe try to get a couple people away to take that intermediate sprint point without a lot of really high power sprinting. I'd look for someone like Melanie Moore or Reznikov to potentially make a move like that. Of course, Lucy Charles is always an instigator. She could be up there to do it as well, but you see Teresa Adams here pushing 168 beats per minute at 259 watts, just sitting nicely towards the front and staying in a good position.
Yeah, Sean, I mean, she is a cool character. Chatted with her a little bit yesterday, and she is so calm. And, you talk about tactics, and she's like, yeah, we'll see what the race pans out. And she certainly knows all the tactics that are necessary, but she's not too worried about it. She's going to let her legs kind of speak for themselves, and she's very calm about things. And, we mentioned it last week, but very much worth repeating. Not only is she a two-time Asia Pacific Ironman champion, and obviously a phenomenal triathlete with a bunch of Ironman wins and 70.3 wins under her belt. But this year, Sean, she won the New Zealand Pro Time Trial Championship and was third in the straight road race champ. So she's pretty good at just straight bike racing as well.
Yeah, and any athletes like that, like Teresa, with that kind of power and those credentials, as long as they've got a little bit of experience on Zwift, get through the first couple laps, especially on a course like Crit City, you've got 15 more laps to learn the course. So it's pretty much just survive lap 1 and 2, and then get yourself in a good position, and then start learning each lap and go step by step, getting better and better, and really timing out where that finish line is.
Absolutely. We have Melanie Moore on screen. She's had great results in our series so far. And last week, she had great performance with third place, and she is now fourth in the GC. So look out for big things from Melanie. The course like this crit course, doesn't necessarily suit her very big strength, which seems to be climbing really well, but she doesn't have any trouble sticking in a group and having good performances on a course like this. So expect big things from her. Other athletes out there in that group, Lucy Charles Barclay was actually won the Super League race yesterday. So not a lot of time in between drinks on the Zwift racing, Sean.
Yeah, she won a nice race in the Super League event, and which was on the Yorkshire course, so much different than here. This one's a lot flatter, a lot tighter and faster racing, and we've got a much bigger pack going through the whoop section and getting ready to hit that final lap before the intermediate sprint.
Yep. And she was out there with Emma Plant, had a great race as well in that series. Georgia Taylor Brown on screen. She raced as well yesterday and having a great performance here today, sitting in comfortably in the back of the group. And she definitely has, she knows what to do in Zwift racing tactically as well. So expect big things out of her, as we have pretty much the whole group together. We've lost two or three athletes so far, but mostly one group altogether at the front of the course. As you said, Sean, just one lap to go to the intermediate sprint.
Yeah, and this is a time where you really want to position yourself, make sure you're towards the front. It is stringing out a little bit. We don't see a big blob of riders, so get from the back closer to the front and really hope you get a good hope for a good power up here. If not, you got to play the tactics of when do you make your move to the finish. Angela Nath, one we had on the recce ride yesterday, we were taking her through the sprint finish, the corners, where to use your sprint, what point to look for to actually use your power up to give yourself the best shot of using your power up into that final 100 meters.
Yeah, these athletes holding a steady pace. It looks like most of these women are 4.5, 5 watts per kilo. As you said, definitely some hard effort as they go through the front. We see Teresa Adam taking her pole at the front of the course, over 4 watts per kilo, 4.5 watts per kilo specifically. So they're all together with not too much longer before that intermediate sprint.
Yeah, and if you've been savvy with your power ups in the last couple laps, you would have seen the laps coming down, getting closer to the 8th lap or the intermediate sprint, and really look to hold on to an aero power up or a featherweight to really use it to your advantage in that last 100 meters.
Yep, there we go. We see Sky Monch comfortably in that group with Landridge as well. We have a few athletes burning some burrito power-ups using a double draft. We see Sky reaching over her shoulder to use that double draft. Great place for the double draft, Sean. Kind of able to get your momentum and really move through the group on this whip section with that double draft.
Yeah, especially with the descent. I mean, you lose the double draft advantage of the double draft on any of the uphills over 3%, but you get enough of the downhill here and then the long stretch of 1% where you get the double draft for the majority of that section. And this is where you'd really want it because it flattens out. You've got 1% grade, and now you're getting your double draft for a nice portion of this circuit and really resting your legs.
Yep, there you go. Good call. As looks like they're kind of theoretically everybody's looking over their shoulder to see what the other athletes are doing, but I do think it's going to be all out here in just a few seconds, Sean. And I predict that this race is going to blow apart when they go through that banner for the intermediate sprint. And we'll see counterattacks hopefully coming across to kind of light things up as we see Amelia Watkinson, fantastic cyclist in triathlon at the front of this group from New Zealand.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of tactics played here, really trying to maintain a good position, even if you're not going for the sprint. But I think we'll see more Adams, a lot of the higher placed riders and the GC contenders really pushing for this intermediate sprint point here.
Yep, there we go. So there looks like we have Jackie Herring at the front. She's pushing out big watts, 6.3 watts per kilo. Laura Sedal, 5.3. Emma Pallant on tired legs from racing yesterday. She's at 5 watts per kilo. Jackie Herring has a little bit of a gap, Sean. She's trying to go it alone, but no, she is brought right back. Jocelyn McCauley up to the wheel of Jackie Herring. Melanie Marr at the front at 6 watts per kilo. McCauley at 7.2. So they are going for it, absolutely going for it. Everybody's burning those power-ups. We got some aero power-ups. We got 400 meters to go about till this sprint. We're going to see a right-hand corner and then about 100 meters with Marr at the front. Lucy Charles Barkley on a rail. Teresa Adam going through pretty quickly. Teresa Adam has good momentum coming through here, and it looks like it was Teresa Adam, Lucy Charles Barkley, and maybe Jocelyn McCauley will get that results board up here for you in a second, but it looked like Teresa Adam, and she did. Teresa Adam, Jocelyn McCauley, Lucy Charles Barkley, Emma Pallant, and Ruth Assel on the board. This is it, though, Sean. There's separation, and here's the question. Are these athletes going to stay on the gas and try to stay away? I mean, this is your podium. There's not really a need for them to do that, but let's see if some breaks happen from this.
Yeah, there were some massive gaps there. We saw a couple athletes off the back, and then two distinct groups forming kind of after that. I think they're going to pull back through, but some athletes may get cut out here if they weren't close enough at the back of that sprint.
Blown apart. Clommer is off. Corbin is off. Lauren Brandon is 9 seconds back. Van Heerden is off the group. Kelsey Withrow is 8 seconds back. Meredith Kessler, Kinsey Lane, they are all off the back of this group as we see, this front group kind of grouping up, but it's going to, determine the rest of the race as when these women at the front get back on the gas, and Emma Pallant goes to the front and pushes a steady pace. She's still recovering, but recovering at 4.2 watts per kilo, it doesn't feel that good.
And when we saw those numbers all go into orange, 9, 8.5, 9.5, 10.5 watts per kilogram, a lot of the longer course athletes or any of the athletes coming in on tired legs may just have a hard time getting up to anywhere near that kind of power. So it's not that they're, tactically wrong. It's just that those women at the front have such high power to weight ratio and just get away, and it's almost impossible to pull it back.
Yeah, and right now we have a small group of, it looks like about 6 athletes, 17, 18 seconds off the back. I don't think we're going to see them. They're going to have to be putting in some pretty hard efforts to bridge up, and the fact that they got split apart at that section of the race makes me think they probably don't have it in the legs to bring back this group, only because this group is still pretty big, Sean. I can't really count them all out, but it looks like about 20, 22 riders still in this front group, with Teresa Adams now pushing the effort at the front.
Yeah, and most of the GC contenders are all up here. So Teresa Adams, Jocelyn McCauley, Lucy Charles, Annabelle Luxford's still up there. Melanie Moore is still in there. So a lot of the kind of pre-race favorites in this front group, and they're going to continue keeping the pedal to the metal and really pushing the pace here.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going underneath the banner here as we speak. Jocelyn McCauley on the right side of our screen having a great performance here, and she's doing such a good job of tactically obviously being in the right place at the right time, but clearly going after those sprint points. She did that last week. She was able to do that at the finish last week, and intermediate sprint this week, and so we'll see the top 3 are going to be, I think, Sean, still separated by just a few points at the end of today's race.
Yeah, the women's race is much closer than the men's was, at least at the top. So I think it's going to continue to be that way throughout the whole series. I think we'll see a little bit of back and forth between, the athletes that are going for those intermediate KOMs or really just trying to go for the biggest points across the finish line. And I think it's going to stay pretty tight throughout this June Invitational.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, these athletes are very consistent. Certainly those athletes on the podium as well as the rest of these women here. But you kind of never know what's going to happen. On that note, Flora Duffy kind of told us that she was feeling a little bit under the weather this week. So good on her for getting out there today. Rachel Clommer let us know that there were big storms. So she was worried whether or not her internet was going to be stable. And Sophie Caldwell had a leak in her roof. A lot of drama happening even at home. You think the drama only happens when you travel to a race, but in Zwift racing, we can get the same pre-race drama as well.
Yeah, I mean, those are everywhere you go, whether it's outdoors racing, indoor racing, there's going to be a little bit of adversity. Who's going to predict that you've got a leak in your roof morning of your race or evening of your race in Zwift? And I mean, it's overcoming those little hiccups and trying to get on the start line as prepared as possible and giving it what you got on that day.
And we got Annabelle Luxford on the screen right here. She's one that woke up pretty early for us down in Australia as well. She got a little bit more rest with the women's race happening second this week compared to last week. So we're stoked to have her on the line and still in the front group, having a great race with Annabelle Luxford pushing 4 watts per kilo, taking a pole at the front of the race. At the moment, Teresa Adam is right back on the front with her foot on the gas pedal. We now have 12K to go, and it doesn't look like those athletes at the front, like a Teresa Adam, Jocelyn McCauley, and Jackie Herring, want to let the effort slow down. Sean, tell us a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses. Like, there are some athletes right now that really want the effort to slow so they have more pop in the sprint, and then there's some athletes that want it to be absolutely as hard as possible all the way to the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen Melanie Moore podium a couple times at Crit City, so you likely wouldn't want her or Sophie Caldwell or Flora Duffy to be hanging around with the last 150 meters to go. You want to dampen their legs, you want to soften it up and really make the pace high consistently through the entire race in Crit City and not let it come down to that final 100 meters of glory. So get them out of the race, get them into a second pack, and keep the pace as high as possible.
There you go. Coming through the whoop section is our front group. The Chase group is still just 30 seconds back. It's going to be a big call for them to get all the way back to the group, but I think they're hanging in there pretty tough with Meredith Kessler, Skye Monch, Paula Finlay, Kelsey Withrow, Lauren Brandon, Flora Duffy in that group, Kinsey Lane also in that group, and Amelia Watkinson. So very strong Chase group, trying their best to get back, but it's going to be a big call with the horsepower that we have in this front group, including Angela Nath, Lermont, McCauley, Lenny Ramsey, Teresa Adam, Emma Pallant, and Reznikov, as well as many, many others.
And Jess Learmont has a ton of experience being a driving factor in WTS races. She's one of the fastest swimmers, typically will lead out in most WTS races, and then will have to push high power with only a handful of athletes to try to stay away and keep that breakaway going. So she's very familiar with being in the front group and having to trade turns and work well together with other athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. She has great experience. And Sean, am I wrong in thinking that those athletes that are very good swimmers, as you say, Lermont is, they're so used to that high effort, high heart rate that they can do a lot better in a course like this where there isn't as much room for recovery and you're just kind of always on the throttle?
I think they're used to kind of trying to stay away from everybody. You know, you get an advantage in this with your swim and you come out with 5, 10, 30 seconds in some cases, a minute in long course races. You don't want to give that up. So you want to really work on your bike power, your bike strength, and keep that gap building and not decreasing throughout the entirety of the race.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. So right now we have this front group, a great shot of our front women's group. There are now 45 seconds up on our chase group. Great shot. Thanks, team, for putting in that chase. We're 30 seconds now. It shows on the screen with Amelia Watkinson in this group. We know Paula Finlay is in that group, as well as Meredith Kessler. Kelsey Withrow is in that group. Kinsey Lane is in that group. Taylor Brown is also in there with Lauren Brandon and Van Heerden as well.
Yeah, and it's amazing. We see Amelia Watkinson here pushing, really trying to drive this chase group. I don't know about you, Matt, but before 5 or 6 a.m., I do not push my best watts. So amazing to see the Australians here really digging deep, pushing hard, and being competitive. With Teresa Adams in the front group, Annabelle Luxford made that front group, and then Amelia Watkinson really doing a lot of the driving and hard work in that second chase pack.
Yeah, there you go. I actually do my best work in my sleep, Sean, so in my dreams. So there you go there. But yeah, absolutely. We've got these athletes pushing good effort as they go through that whoop section. But still, I think there are a lot of looking around. It doesn't seem like in our women's race here today, and I think it's because that GC podium is so tight. Nobody's really... It's not necessary for anybody to make huge moves. Nobody needs to, at least in the podium, nobody needs to make up 10 points. They're all within 1 point of each other. So I think they're less likely to try to make big moves, and they're very much willing to let it come down to the finish sprint.
Yeah, and this course we've seen, especially on the men's side, it's hard for those breakaways to stick, and unless you have, even with a group of 4 of some of the best cyclists in the world on the men's side, Kanema, Lionel, they couldn't stay away for 3 laps. So the pack really does make a big difference. It'll swallow up anybody. If 1 or 2 riders go off the front, it's likely not going to stick. So we'll see them probably sit in unless there's someone who gets really aggressive and really pushes the pace. I would look more towards lap 14, 15, maybe like a long attack to stay away instead of at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a smart call. We look right now, we see Antonina Reznikov pushing 70 RPMs at 180 beats a minute. Looks super casual. It doesn't look like she's working at all, but we've got the data to show that she is absolutely on the rivet. But what a composed athlete to look as smooth as she does at that kind of output, Sean.
Yeah, with the longer distance athletes, we tend to, at least in my opinion, I think, or it seems like I'm remembering correctly, we see them using a little bit lower cadence than some of the ITU athletes. And I think that's just that bigger gear. They're used to just holding 70, 80 RPMs, 85 RPMs for a long time. And the short course athletes are continually going in and out of corners, ramping up from a dead stop up to sprinting again. So that they kind of play with the cadence a little more and just ride at a higher cadence in general.
Yeah, I think you might be right there, and we can see it's fun when we get those athletes on screen to see exactly what they are doing as far as the heart rate, watt data, obviously, but also RPMs is very important to performance in triathlon, but very different in a race like Crit City. You're going to have a little bit more variability in your RPMs, most likely as they go through the steeper section. It looks like somebody has a little bit of a gap using the Aero power up. Looks like Langer is trying to get a little bit of a gap off the front.
Yeah, and we've constantly seen that through the whoop section. You use your power up, you can get a little gap pretty easily, especially if some of the athletes are sitting back, kind of slowly going through, maybe not getting out of the saddle to push over the top of those little whoop sections. But using a power up, just trying to stay in good position. I think she maybe tested a little bit and saw that she wasn't getting as much of a gap as maybe she liked, and has kind of sat up and come back to the pack.
Yep, there you go, right? Everybody is back together in this main group with Macaulay at the front, pushing almost 5 watts per kilo. Emma Pallant taking her turn near the back of the group, trying to get a little bit of recovery, maybe not so much recovery at 4.5 watts per kilo, but Emma Pallant is one to always put that top effort in, even especially after having a big race yesterday. Sean, this course on Crit City, obviously, a lot of laps, 16 laps, not a lot of elevation gain. But for the next 2 weeks, things are going to change quite a bit. Next week, we're going to Innsbruck with the leg snapper climb. That one is brutal. It's kind of a circuit race, we'll call it. 4 laps on that one. That one's going to blow apart, no doubt. And then week 4 is certainly my favorite to watch, not always my favorite to ride, is Tour of Fire and Ice, 25K long with Alpe de Zwift finish on top. That one is going to be brutal.
Yeah, that's a super hard course, and the next 2 will be very hard racing. We've seen these athletes race over leg snapper before, or the majority of them race over leg snapper, and it's super hard to get up that 2-minute hill. We're not going to do it with the final climb like we did last time, but we know from the viewers and the athletes themselves that leg snapper is kind of a Zwift favorite, and looking forward to that one next week.
Absolutely, and pro tip. You maybe can have a coffee drinking game around how many times me and Sean say leg snapper next week. Apparently, we say it a lot. But anyways, it's going to be a pretty exciting course for sure, and it is Absolutely brutal. Not only is that climb tough, but the descent over the backside often can make or break an athlete's day. But we're coming through with lap 14, just a couple laps to go, Sean. Lucy Charles Barclay and Teresa Adam have not slowed down at all since the end of that sprint point, Sean. Their beats per minute from the data I've got have not gone below 165, so they are keeping on that gas.
Yeah, that's what these intermediate sprint points do. They really make the back half of this race very, very high intensity, very hard, and you really got to save your energy and play it smart here. A lot of Zwift racing is using finesse to go from the back to the front, but not overshooting it and then taking the lead and going off the front. So you really want to use that finesse to move yourself up without going off the front of the pack. And we see Lucy Charles here kind of dangling on the back, getting right into position, moving up slowly, but not using too much power, so she just shoots right off the front of this pack.
Yeah, Sean, is that a tactic to make a move, to kind of slingshot yourself? You know, she let herself actually off the back of that group and then use the momentum to go through. Is that a tactic, or was she just kind of playing catch up?
I don't think it's a tactic. I think I'm sure some of these athletes get slight delays in gameplay. And if they see a little gap opening, they overcompensate and push a little harder to make sure they close it down. And then you'll oftentimes see them ride straight through the pack and off the front, which isn't what they're trying to do. It's just they've put too much power into trying to get back on and kind of didn't finesse it on the back end to really slow down before they got to the front of the pack.
Oh, I love that. I think we got a stank eye from Ruth looking straight into that camera. She is working hard. Just 2 laps to go. Ruth Assel definitely putting in the effort, but she'll be stoked to be where she's at. And she's one that, again, I keep saying it over and over, but Zwift experience on these courses is super important. And I would say, probably pretty safe to say, Ruth is one of the most experienced Zwift riders in this group. And if she times that sprint appropriately, she has a great chance of getting on the podium here today, Sean.
Yeah, and last time we were here, she lost the sprint finish, photo finish, I believe it was to Reznikov. So very experienced on this course. Took an attack from a little further out than we thought she would, but held it all the way to the finish and just got nipped at the line. So very impressive from Ruth, and look forward to her being in the top 5 in when it comes down to this sprint finish today.
Yeah, but they're getting towards the end of it, Sean, through lap 15, on lap 15, 3.8K to go. We have Melanie Moore at 6 watts per kilo. So definitely don't think that because there isn't a big climb, Melanie Moore isn't going to push out the big watts, as she is absolutely doing that right now. But Teresa Adam in control at the front of this group at 5 watts per kilo as they go through Sean's whoop section.
And Melanie looked very calm on that section. When we saw her video, she was very calm, very in control, just kind of waiting and keeping herself in a good position here as we come down to just under 2 laps to go.
Yeah, and we have the front group going through some of our lapped riders. I think we had Clommer and Corbin there, and they're just letting their group go right by as the group is getting into the meat of it. And as I said, very, very high watts coming out of that front group right now as they kind of look at each other. But Sean, do you expect any moves, or we're all these women are saving it for that last lap?
I expect somebody to make a move from a K to 800 meters out. They'll kind of misjudge the last turns. A lot of those last 4 turns look pretty similar, and it's easy to think, oh, this is the turn for the sprint, jump quite early, and then realize, oh, I've actually got another 1 or 2 to go. So I think we'll see something like that happen here today.
I think you're right, and I think the production team was reading my mind, because if I was to take a guess on who that might be, it would be Emma Pallant would be one to make a little move. But it's risky if you're one of those GC contenders to make a move, because if it doesn't work, you're probably going to get swept to the back of that group and miss some points. But it looked like Emma Pallant was definitely getting some help, making sure she had her hand ready for a power up to be used, and knew where she was on course. So let's see if we're going to get any big moves out of Emma Pallant, or if she's going to save it to the end.
Yeah, and that is the risk reward of making an aggressive move from a little further out. You could come away with the wins. The riders behind you end up looking at each other and not really covering it, and you come away with a win, or you go back to 12th place because the whole pack swallows you up with 100 to go. It's each rider's choice of how they're feeling, what they think their best advantage is during this race and during this final 200 meters, and we'll see if anyone takes that long approach.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to take those risks in a race that's just a one-off race. You see someone use a ghost as they go through the finish line here. It looks like Ruth Assel going for a little bit of a gap. But yeah, Sean, it's hard to make those risks if the consequence is you move really far down the GC. And if it's just a one-off race, it's a little bit easier to do that. And I think we've seen that maybe from the women's field here today, is that everybody's looking, and smartly, rightly so, looking towards the GC and not willing to risk being totally out of it by trying to get a win. But Ruth Assel, a little bit off the back of the group here, Sean. She's going to have to do some work to get back into that draft and then move back to the front with just 1.5 kilometers to go in Crit City.
Yeah, and the athletes are making those calculations on do I have the legs for the final sprint? Did I get the proper power up that I need? Should I use the power up to try to gain an advantage from a long way out, because I know I don't have the aero helmet and I don't want it to come down to the final 200. So all those calculations are going on in their head. They're making those decisions, and we've got 1.3K to go. I think we're going to start seeing some potential attacks here.
Yeah, I'm impressed to see Jocelyn McCauley not afraid to sit at the front of the group. She's won in podium position, and she's here at the front. She was at 5 watts per kilo at the front. We have Lucy Charles Barclay taking a turn as well, Sean.
Yeah, this part of the course is really about positioning, not getting too far off the back. You know the fireworks going to happen in the next 200 to 300 meters, so you don't want to be going from the back when it does. You also want to make sure no one makes a jump from a K out and you're not ready for it. So position yourself up front, stay close, and give yourself the best shot at coming across the line in the front group.
Yeah, great advice. And it is on now, Sean. We have Lucy Charles Barclay pushing a big effort going into that about 800 meters to go. Teresa Adam came right over her shoulder. We have Langridge at the front, Laura Sadal there as well. Emma Pallant is now at the front of this group. Reznikov, 500 meters to go. We have Reznikov near the front. We had Teresa Adams is up there as well. And Lucy Charles Barclay at the front, and they are neck and neck. It's going to be a drag race. We got Teresa Adam and Lucy Charles Barclay at the front of this group, pushing the pace. 400 meters to go around this corner, Sean, and this is where you need to go. And all those power-ups go, aero power-ups galore as we come into this last corner. And it looks like we have Ruth Assel is coming around the corner. In the front is Ruth Assel. Teresa Adam is coming around, and I think Teresa Adam got it at the last second with maybe Jocelyn McCauley right behind. But, oh, man, Ruth went for it, Sean. And what is it going to be? The final result of, wow, great shot by Ruth Assel. But I think Teresa Adam came over the top, Sean, just at the end with Jocelyn McCauley on her wheel.
Yeah, that was an amazing finish. I mean, the women timed those power-ups much better than the men. We saw them use them down that final home stretch, and we got a repeat of last week's finishing position. Teresa Adams taking the win, Jocelyn McCauley in second, and Ruth Assel with a big push from a little further out. Really thought she was going to hold on there for a second, and finally just coming in third. Laura Sadal in fourth, Lucy Charles back to fifth, Melanie Moore in sixth. What a great final finish there in the last 100. Let's see if we can get a replay there.
Oh man, Sean, that was phenomenal. So stoked to see Ruth really go after some of the best athletes in the sport as a new pro, and she went for it and was so close. She timed it perfectly. As we said, the Zwift racing and that experience has so much to do it. And here was the points that were taken at the end, and that's going to move Ruth Assel up a little bit. That's going to, I think, put Teresa Adam in the lead. We'll get the full GC points for you in a second, but I think Lucy Charles Barclay is no longer, I don't believe, going to be tied for the lead anymore, as she gets fifth place across the finish line. So she's losing a few points, but I think our podium will probably be similar to what it was when we started here today, but just a few more points separating. But wow, Teresa Adam, for someone that doesn't have huge amount of Zwift racing experience, Sean, she times this to perfection.
Yeah, she's been perfect across the last two races, both of them coming down to the final sprint. And there you see it, 37 points on the day for Teresa Adams, Jocelyn McCauley 34, Lucy Charles 29. So that's definitely going to put Teresa Adams well ahead here in the GC standings. Jocelyn McCauley will likely continue to move up. Her and Lucy will be really close. I don't know the exact points there. We'll have to wait for the totals to get calculated. That math is not able to be done in my head right now.
No, I got too much other stuff going on right now, Sean, to be able to do that. But certainly, Teresa Adam is going to be in the lead after this, and I believe it's going to be Jocelyn in second. But we will get those. We'll stop pretending like we know what's happening, and we'll get you those accurate results here in a second. But wow, that I just can't say, how impressive that finish was. And here we go on screen with Teresa Adam just timing it to perfection, just getting that wheel in front of Ruth Assel with Jocelyn McCauley, picked the right wheel to be on around that final corner. And they both came across in front of Ruth Assel, but great timing from Ruth and Teresa and Jocelyn, all using their power-ups at the right time. And notice, actually, Sean, Ruth Assel, it looked like her power-up kind of ran out right when she needed it.
Yeah, it was like a second and a half too short. But again, I mean, she was off the front. Teresa Adams had almost the perfect lead out train of Ruth Assel and Jocelyn McCauley. She came from third wheel to around that bend to come into the front just at the right moment, used her power up perfectly. And for someone who, like you mentioned, not a ton of experience on Zwift, is a true tactician so far in these past two races.
Oh, she is doing an awesome job, and easy to say how great of a job she's doing by looking at our series points, the GC right now. So Teresa Adam getting 37 points in both the first two races. So she has a pretty good lead at 4 points ahead of Jocelyn McCauley, who's had obviously some great races as well. 4 points further back to Lucy Charles Barclay. So those three, that podium, they're pretty well ahead. Lucy Charles Barclay, 10 points ahead of Melanie Moore in fourth, and 11 in front of Ruth Assel. So that podium is pretty tight. Certainly some room to move there, but 8 points separate our podium there, Sean. Some pretty tight racing.
Yeah, it's really, really impressive to see those both Teresa Adams, Jocelyn McCauley come back on the second week and really just replicate the exact same thing they did in first week, establishing themselves as some of the riders to beat in this series.
Yeah, absolutely. And here we go back to the men's totals. Lionel Sanders, he hasn't won any of the races yet. Maybe disappointed to that, but he is a gamer and he knows he's looking for that GC. So he now has a very, very big lead with 10 points ahead of Anthony Costas in second place. Mike Phillips moves all the way to podium position with his 35 points today. So he's 63 points, just 3 points behind Anthony Costas. James Cunnama be a little bit bummed to move down the field today. He's still got 31 points, but it's just some high scores in the men's racing. So 61 points for James Cunnama, and Reese Barclay still showing himself capable against some of the best athletes on the planet in Zwift racing, rounding out our top 5.
Yeah, I think Lionel said he could win all the intermediate sprints and finish top 4 or 5, never win a race, but potentially win the GC standings. So it just gives you a little insight into what he's thinking and his tactics. He's been really aggressive on the intermediate points, whether it's the KOMs or the intermediate sprint today, and it's paid off. He's at the top and he hasn't won a race yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he'll be okay with that if it comes down to the last race series or the last race of the series, and he does that. But finishing up Alpe d'Huez Zwift, I think Lionel will back himself to try to get across that finish line first. But Sean, such exciting racing. Thanks for being a part of it with me here today. I know I can't wait till next week, Innsbruck Racing, to have 60 of the best professional triathletes in the world fighting for the GC in our June Invitational series. For Sean Jefferson, I'm Matt Lieto. Thanks so much for watching with us today. Until next time, ride on.